More about how Paul Singer does business. The story begins in a small town called Sidney, Nebraska, population 6,282. 2 hours outside Denver, Sidney is the longtime home of the sporting goods retailer Cabela's, which sells fishing and hunting gear. In October of 2015, Singer's hedge fund disclosed an 11% stake in Cabela's and set about pushing the board to sell the company. Cabela's management, apparently fearing a long and costly fight with Singer, announced it would look for a buyer. Now, at the time, Cabela's was a relatively healthy company. It was posting nearly $2 billion a year in gross profits off $4 billion in revenue. There didn't seem to be any immediate need to sell, but Cabela's sold anyway after being pushed. So 1 year after Singer entered the equation, Bass Pro Shops announced the purchase of Cabela's. The company's stock price surged. Within a week, literally a week, Paul Singer cashed out. He bought the stock for $38 a share. He sold it for $63 a share. His hedge fund made at least $90 million up front and likely more over time. But in Sidney, Nebraska, it was a very different story. The residents of Sidney did not get rich. Oh, no, just the opposite. Their community was devastated, destroyed. The town lost nearly 2,000 jobs. A heartbreakingly familiar cascade began. People left, property values collapsed, and then people couldn't leave. They were trapped there. One of the last thriving small towns in this country went under. We recently sent 2 producers to Sidney, Nebraska to survey the wreckage there and to consider what happened. Our producers talked to more than a dozen former Cabela's employees. Almost all of them refused to speak to us on camera, fearful of legal retribution from the famously vicious Paul Singer. But off camera, they told us their story. Here it is.
Sidney is, it's a great place to be.
This is Sidney, Nebraska, a small town 2 hours outside of Denver. For decades, a sporting goods retailer, Cabela's, kept its headquarters in Sidney. As the company grew more prosperous, so did the town.
Cabela's was the keystone employer. Our motto forever was small town values big time opportunities.
But that motto was turned on its head when Elliott Management Corporation, that's a New York-based hedge fund, managed by billionaire Paul Singer, took an ownership stake in Cabela's.
When we got the news this company is coming in from New York City and buying a huge stake in Cabela's, that shakes things up.
At the time, Cabela's was making more than $1 billion a year. But Paul Singer's firm sensed it could make a quick buck by driving up the stock price by forcing a merger. The once thriving town of Sidney lost everything.
I cried the second I got the phone call. I couldn't help it. I bawled.
That's how a longtime Cabela's employee reacted to news that she was losing her job.
I had something good going. That was my future. And now I don't really know what my future is.
Probably looking at around 2,000 jobs.
2,000 jobs gone?
Yeah.
Sidney was devastated.
He ruined it. A good American town and just destroyed it.
Tim O'Connell runs the town's lumber yard. Before the merger, business was great.
We were just buried, you know, with business.
Now his customer base has collapsed.
How many new homes have been built since Cabela's and Bass Pro merged?
In the city limits here, there have been one.
One house.
One house.
Before Paul Singer's hedge fund put Cabela's in its sights, Sidney was experiencing a building boom.
We're going to build a new housing subdivision to meet housing needs. All these great things were happening, and instead we are working our tails off to try to figure out a way to survive.
For the people of Sidney, it's been a disaster. Those who want to leave Sidney can't go. Housing values have collapsed, tethering them there. For those who want to stay, it's almost impossible to find a job.
How long did it take you to find a new job?
It took me just shy of 5 months.
And is it as good as your old job?
No, not even close.
As Sidney collapsed, Wall Street cashed in. Paul Singer's hedge fund sold out before the merger was even complete. The fund made nearly $100 million.
They don't care. They don't care about rural Nebraska, small town.
I hope Paul Singer is proud of what he did. If money is that big of a god to him, it's a pretty sick human being.
Well, as we were doing that story, we were warned repeatedly by people around Washington, don't criticize Paul Singer. That's not a good idea. And as that package played, I got the following text from a very well-known person in Washington. Holy smokes, I can't believe you're doing this. I'm afraid of Paul Singer. We'll see what happens. Meanwhile, Ben Sasse, and this may point to the point the texter was making, Ben Sasse is a U.S. Senator who represents the state of Nebraska. Sidney, of course, isn't that large. But you might think the death of a town in his state would be of concern to Ben Sasse, again, U.S. Senator from Nebraska. But so far, it doesn't seem like he's ever commented on what's happened to Sidney. We looked hard. Then we called Sasse's office to see if they could point to a time where he commented on the destruction of Sidney or simply supply a statement to us about what happened there. But Ben Sasse's office didn't even respond to our producers. That's odd. But then here's one possible explanation for that. During his Senate run, Ben Sasse received the largest possible donation from Paul Singer.